Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Russia unleashes its biggest drone attack on Ukraine as Zelensky travels to meet the Pope and calls for tougher sanctions. No breakthrough in Gaza ceasefire talks as Netanyahu wraps up a third White House meeting with Trump and US envoy delays Doha trip. And Christian Horner's sacked as Red Bull team principal after 20 years amid team decline and internal disputes. Russia has launched its largest drone strike on Ukraine yet, targeting cities across the country, including Kyiv and Luhansk, with more than 700 drones and missiles. Ukraine says the scale of the attack proves the need for tougher sanctions, especially on Russian oil. For more on this, I'm joined by Sergei Markov, director of the Institute of Political Studies and former public spokesperson to President Putin. A pleasure to have you on, Sergei. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, Russia fired over 720 drones and 13 ballistic missiles that struck various cities in Ukraine last night. Was it because President Trump attacked Vladimir Putin? Strong criticism in the White House from the US president.
No. This big number of the drones by which Russian army attacked Ukrainian military targets, it's same Ukrainian attack against Russia. It's also bigger and bigger and bigger. You may know that this new kind of war is war of drones. Now it's 700, later it will be 800, 900, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. So it's normal development of this new technological basis of the new kind of war. As if we're talking about Donald Trump, we see that his criticism not absolutely not connected with this attack. It's what this attack, what he is expected and what he told about. But another point, Donald Trump want to get Nobel Peace Prize for the stopping war in Ukraine. He was not able to make real pressure on the Ukrainian regime and to Europeans to accept normal condition for the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. After this, he decided to make pressure against Vladimir Putin, asking his unconditional ceasefire. But Russia very strongly against unconditional ceasefire because it can lead to the expansion of war and sending European troops to the Ukrainian territory, which can be very dangerous for the next stage of war. That's why Putin denies this Trump suggestion. That's why Trump now criticizing Vladimir Putin.
But I mean, a lot of the world could argue that Ukraine has been listening to Donald Trump. They signed the minerals deal with Donald Trump. They've been holding various talks with NATO countries and European countries to come to a deal. They've tried to hold talks with Vladimir Putin. That hasn't happened. And Donald Trump said last night that Putin is, quote, very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless. Does President Putin actually really want the war to end? And is he prepared to work with Trump and Europe to end the war?
Vladimir Putin wants to stop this war as soon as possible because from our point of view, Ukrainians, they are Russians. And you may know that Kyiv was capital of Russia during 3 centuries here. Kyiv now capital of Ukraine. So for 80% of Ukrainians, Russian language is native language. Ukraine been part of the Russia during more than 1,000 years. And so for us, it's civil war. We want to stop this war as soon as possible. But we regard the situation as occupation of Ukraine by Western countries, which use Ukrainian proxy army and their Western war against Russia. Russian suggestion for the peace deal, it's very easy. Stop political repression, liberation of all political prisoners in Ukraine, stop political repression against Russian language, and stop political repression against Orthodox Church, and stop involvement of Ukraine to the enemies to Russia, meaning NATO and European Union. Neutrality of Ukraine. So if Western countries agree to accept these Russian demands, Vladimir Putin will stop this war next day.
President Trump also said he was looking at a sanctions bill that would see 500% tariffs imposed on countries that trade with Russia after Russia keeps on bombarding Ukraine with missiles, despite talks that Putin has been having with President Trump on the phone. Is Russia's economy ready for such heavy sanctions because it's struggling anyway?
We think that it's more propaganda, but not a real deal. First of all, about sanctions. You may know that during this sanction period, economic growth of Russia sums about 3.5 or 4%. Economic growth of Europe, 1%. Economic growth of United States, 2.5%. So Russia has economic growth bigger than Europe and America altogether. It's first. Secondly, 500 tariffs is stopping of the trade. The main buyer of Russian oil, and this is the main concern of Western country, is China and India and partly Turkey. As anybody believe that Donald Trump want to start full stopping of any trade with China and India? No, it's a joke.
There's been a lot of speculation over Russia's former transport minister's death after he was fired by President Putin. Some commentators are alleging that his killing was ordered. Are these allegations correct? Is this what led to the death of the former transport minister in Russia?
You know, a lot of rumors. I think most of the Russian public not so much believe about suicide of former minister, because, frankly speaking, in Russia and as most of the other countries, most of the people doesn't like ministers, doesn't trust to ministers, and doesn't trust to any politicians. But I think that it's more probably suicide. Also because now Russian officials in stress period. It's interesting statistics that a number of the Russian ambassadors which dead because of the head strike now more during these 3 years. Bigger than before the Ukrainian war, maybe in 3 or 4 times. It means that Russians now officials in the stress, and a part of this stress could be suicide of the former minister who have been fired just, and his previous position, head of the Kursk region, show that he had been corrupted, and because his corruption, few hundreds of the Russian citizens in Kursk region had been killed by Ukrainian army.
And I just want to end with one thing. Last night, President Trump says Putin is killing too many people, so the US are sending some more defensive weapons to Ukraine. What do you make of the US sending more military armor to Ukraine? And what do you make of the deaths on both the Russian and Ukrainian side? Because there have been talk that over 1 million Russian soldiers have died in this war that you started in Ukraine.
Of course, it's anti-Russia military propaganda. If you look at the specific figures, for example, exchange of the bodies of the killed soldiers of Russian and Ukrainian army. You will see last four times there was exchange of some 100 or 1,000, and proportion something about this. One killed Russian soldiers have been exchanged to the 40, 50, 60 of the killed Ukrainian soldiers. Practical proportion, I think, not same, because Russian army is going forward now, taking control of the battlefield. But nevertheless, it's absolutely clear that number of killed Ukrainian soldiers much more than number of the Russian soldiers. Frankly speaking, we doesn't like it too much, because I already mentioned, for us, it's civil war. For us, every killed Ukrainian soldiers is Russian man who prepare his life to the ambition of the Great Britain, European Union, and American politicians.
But every life is important to many people, especially their families. Sergei Markov, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more on this, I'm joined by Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko. Oleksiy, thank you so much for joining me. I was just speaking earlier to our former interviewee from Russia. I don't know what you made of what he had to say there.
I heard this interview. Hello. Again, Russian propaganda for everything. First, you see why we in Ukraine would say that Russia is committing genocide against Ukrainians. The first reason, the first thing which shows us that Russia is committing genocide is just that Russia denies existence of Ukrainians. So they just deny existence of our nation. They say, no, they're Russian, but some bad Russian. It's crazy completely. We heard this all stuff about Kiev being. It's really crazy. Kiev, yes, was the capital of Kiev Rus. At that time, Moscow did not exist at all. So with the same, we can say that Russia is part of Ukraine. So, I mean, it's crazy rhetorics, and you heard it. Second thing, he said that Trump should pressure Ukraine to agree on Russian conditions. But Russian conditions are just impossible to agree on. Russia wants to take territories which they even didn't manage to conquer, to control. Russia wants Ukraine to destroy its own army. No one state in the world would never agree on such conditions. And Putin clearly knows this, because Putin really, as President Trump rightly said, Putin likes to kill people. He kills people, and he wants to continue. And I hope that now President Trump is clear about real intentions of Putin, and he will punch him hard.
So you did say there that you hope President Donald Trump is clear about his intentions when it comes to Vladimir Putin. But what pressure would you like to be seen to be put on Russia to end this war and come to a ceasefire? What do you want the US to do in this situation?
I think three things will be enough. It's more weapons to Ukraine. It's seizing of Russian frozen assets, and it's real sanctions. The sanctions that the bill is in the Senate. As I know, it's signed by 82 senators in the U.S. Senate, which is unbelievable, 82 from 100, because in such divided politically country as the United States, it's very hard to find the question which can unite 82% of its Senate. But this question unites 82 from 100 U.S. senators about imposing 500% sanctions, secondary sanctions against countries which are buying Russian oil, gas, and uran, and so on. So I think this will be absolutely enough. And if these questions will start to move, I think Putin will be very quickly at the negotiation table with a real intention to stop the war.
And Oleksiy, do you actually think that, you just mentioned there sanctions and more weapons, do you think diplomacy is out of the question now? Do you think that the talks with Russia are just not going to go anywhere? More weapons are needed and heavier clampdown on Russia?
Oh, we know Russians better than anybody else in the world, unfortunately. And I can tell you, Russia understands only one language, language of force, language of strength, nothing else. So if you want to have diplomacy with Russia, first you should punch them. President Trump tried to do another way. And what is the result? Half a year after, no results. Putin continues the war, increasing his attacks, and he is just humiliating United States and President Trump. That's it. So before Putin will be punched, no real diplomacy will happen. I want diplomacy. I want this war. Ukraine agreed from March on unconditional ceasefire. We're ready any minute. The hostilities can stop today. The only obstacle is President Putin.
And also, we have heard that despite his criticism of Vladimir Putin, the Trump administration previously announced a suspension of military aid to Ukraine. I want to ask you how this has impacted Ukraine's ability to intercept Russian attacks and to defend itself, especially, of course, as we enter the summer and the summer offensive of Russia has begun.
Yeah, definitely it's a very important question for us. And if American military support will be stopped, that will influence the situation on the battlefield. Last news is that it is restored, and it's not even clear who was behind this decision. It's clear that it was not President Trump himself. Speaking about Russian summer offensive, I also don't want you to be, just don't believe in these like Russian summer offensive. What is the result? It's the middle of summer already. Russian summer offensive started in May. What is the result? They took 20 villages in the east of Ukraine. For us, it's painful. And again, Ukrainians are killed, soldiers, civilians. But Russia doesn't have a big results. They didn't capture even one small town. So all their results is just a number of ruined villages. So that's it. So Russia will never achieve their goals in this war, with American military support or without. But without, it would be much, much more bloody thing, and it will be much more difficult for all of us. So we need American support, and with American support, we can stop Russia completely. And I think after this, Putin will be much more eager to have a real negotiations.
Oleksiy Goncharenko, I wish you all the safety, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has quietly wrapped up a second day of White House talks with President Trump without any announcement of progress on a Gaza ceasefire deal. Hopes of a breakthrough have grown after the meeting was added to Netanyahu's schedule at the last minute, but no public statement followed. Meanwhile, US envoy Steve Witkoff has delayed his trip to Doha, signalling that negotiations remain far from finalized. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. Trent Murray, a pleasure to have you on the show. Right, we've just seen Pete Hegseth holding talks with Benjamin Netanyahu at the Pentagon. The Israeli Prime Minister is leaving Washington, Trent, without a ceasefire deal. What is actually being achieved on this trip we've seen?
Good evening, Leigh-Ann. Well, cautious optimism, as you rightly say, earlier this week that this visit may have resulted in some sort of ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But Benjamin Netanyahu leaves Washington, certainly with no public signals that a ceasefire has been agreed. We know, of course, those talks have been taking place in the Qatari capital, Doha, both sides suggesting that they remain at an impasse. The basic framework for a temporary ceasefire does appear to be there, around 60 days of hostilities being halted in exchange for around 10 living hostages being handed back over to Israel by Hamas. But it is the longer-term goal of a permanent ceasefire that does appear to be more elusive. We've heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that President Trump is focused on trying to free the hostages held in Gaza. He also said that the pair discussed what he described as the great victory we achieved together in Iran. Now, he has told the Fox Business News channel in the past few hours that he thinks there is a good chance that there will be a ceasefire, but nothing concrete there to suggest that it could be imminent. We've just seen in the past hour or so him meet with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, where he described Israel as a model ally and one that fights to protect itself. So right now, I think from where we're standing, no immediate signs that a ceasefire could be close. In fact, the IDF is increasing the tempo of its military operations. We've seen today them announce that in response to 5 Israeli soldiers being killed by a roadside bomb planted by Hamas, they are sending in additional troops into northern Gaza, and they are telling people to expect an increase in fighting between both sides. So earlier optimism seems to be now making way for the reality on the ground, which is both sides appear to be nowhere near agreeing to a ceasefire right now.
Yes, indeed. And Trent, we've also heard that the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, has delayed his trip to Doha, which you just mentioned, in direct talks happening there. How is this being interpreted by Israeli officials, and does it signal a real stall in negotiations?
Well, certainly publicly, Steve Witkoff is suggesting that there is optimism around achieving a temporary ceasefire by the end of the week. Now, that is similar language than to what we heard from President Trump earlier this week. He also gave a timeline of roughly a week. But we need to remember on the last Friday, just gone, he suggested that Hamas was going to respond within the next 24 hours. So timelines here, like so many times we've seen before, seem to be moving. I think the delay by Steve Witkoff's arrival in Doha suggests that he is not expecting to arrive to both sides being on the brink of any sort of agreement. He did have a meeting with the US cabinet over the past 24 hours where he said he anticipated that the agreement would be around that 60-day temporary ceasefire. But the sticking point seems to be between Israel and Hamas what happens with those IDF soldiers after those 60 days. Hamas is continuing to maintain that it wants to see them completely withdraw from the Gaza Strip, but the Israeli position is that they are not going to be doing that, and they want to maintain some sort of presence there in order to prevent Hamas being able to rearm. Two sides at loggerheads over that key issue. The Israeli foreign minister did say today during a meeting in Slovakia that if Israel agrees to a temporary ceasefire, only then are they willing to discuss a permanent ceasefire. So a lot of moving parts here. Both sides right now trying to be brought together by the negotiators in Doha, but it seems once again to be an elusive task trying to get them to agree.
And Trent, the Houthis are claiming responsibility for sinking a Greek ship in the Red Sea. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, a Greek-operated Liberia-flagged vessel called the Eternity Sea. Now, we saw some pretty dramatic video released by the Houthis in the past 24 hours showing very large explosions on that vessel and it listing to one side, seemingly taking on water. Now, the Houthis have confirmed that they did sink that vessel. They say that it was on its way to the port of Eilat here in Israel. We understand that a rescue operation was underway by a private maritime security group that oversees safety within international shipping. We're being told there were 22 crew members on board. 21 of them were from the Philippines. 1 was Russian. Some initial numbers that we are hearing is that 4 of those seafarers were killed, 6 were rescued, and another 15 are missing. The Houthi-controlled Yemeni Navy are saying that they have rescued a number of those sailors and are providing them with medical care, but this undoubtedly will increase concerns around the safety of international shipping in those international waters. We know that several months ago, the US effectively entered an agreement with the Houthis for them to stop the attacks on Houthi-controlled infrastructure in Iran. in exchange for the Houthis not attacking those international ships. This is now the second time they have attacked an international vessel this week. I think all eyes now will be on Washington to see how they will respond. Will they recommence airstrikes on places like the port of Hodeidah? We will have to wait and see, but undoubtedly that crucial Red Sea shipping route, really important for connecting Asia with Europe, once again finding itself in the firing line of these Houthi attacks.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you so much. For more on this, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by Adolfo Franco, Republican strategist and former advisor to Senator John McCain. It's a pleasure to have you on, Adolfo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Benjamin Netanyahu has always preparing to leave Washington, D.C. without a ceasefire deal and a victory lap with President Donald Trump. Adolfo, what has gone so wrong behind the scenes after so much optimism ahead of Netanyahu's trip?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, that reporting was excellent by your correspondent and consistent with what my White House sources tell me. There is disappointment, but there's also optimism. Number one is President Trump is famous for setting deadlines. They're not always met and not always really, frankly, realistic, although I support President Trump and what he's doing and think it's the right thing to do for the United States and Israel. The thing is, President Trump wanted a ceasefire agreement this week. It still might happen, but there are some serious issues that Israel has, and about Israel will not budge. And the reporting you just heard is a reminder of it. The ambush of Israeli in the death of 5 Israeli soldiers is a reminder that Hamas is still capable of carrying out certainly guerrilla activities in the Gaza Strip. And of course, the violation of the ceasefire agreement and commitment by Yemen to the United States. So it's a reminder of Israel's position that it needs a security zone. It needs a security presence. The prime minister said it publicly before he had dinner with President Trump. Israel will not fully withdraw. That is a Hamas demand. Secondly, Israel is willing to enter into a 60-day ceasefire, but Hamas is insisting that the war end in 60 days. It's not semantics. This would be the second ceasefire. The first was 57 days. The idea behind what Israel wants is 60 days and possible extensions to negotiate what is a post-conflict Gaza look like. Hamas wants in 60 days to conclude the so-called war. And there's where the impasses lie.
Yeah, absolutely, Adolfo, like you did say, and Trent Murray, our correspondent, said that those are really difficult sticking points, and it's important to highlight them because obviously it's bringing those two red lines closer together to try to achieve a ceasefire deal. But we also see Steve Witkoff has delayed his trip to Doha, suggesting that talks aren't as close as we were expecting. But I was just wondering, how risky is it for Trump to be publicly pushing this deal? And he actually has failed to deliver results. And I was speaking about the Russia-Ukrainian situation earlier, and it seems to me that Donald Trump is doing a lot of negotiating, but he's not getting any wins.
Well, I think he is making progress, and he's made progress with both Ukraine and Russia. Right, to remember that there was no meaningful discussions before he became president.
But Adolfo, sorry to interrupt you. Yes, he's making progress, but people are still dying. People are dying in Russia and Ukraine. Yes. Many people are still dying within Gaza. So the talks are all good, but blood's still being shed.
No, that's true, except they were dying before President Trump in both of those theaters, military theaters, before President Trump became president. I think he's pushed an agenda of negotiation and hopefully peace. The challenge President Trump has, and as you mentioned, I am very familiar with John McCain, is that there has to be a structure here of verification of what the parties commit to do. We just saw what happened in Yemen. So we can rush a ceasefire and both theaters, but let's talk about Gaza, only to find guerrilla warfare and ambushes, which Israel cannot tolerate. But your question about President Trump, yes, he is the person, remember, that said he would end the war on day one with Ukraine. That has not happened. But I have to give him credit that he is putting considerable pressure on our allies, which are really Ukraine and Israel, to be more flexible than they have been willing to do so in the past. That's first. Secondly, while still recognizing, and these are reminders, the threats that Hamas and frankly Iran and its proxies continue to pose. These are just very difficult issues to resolve. His urgency helps in many ways to address your question about ending the killing and the fighting and the humanitarian crisis. But they won't yield fruit if the ceasefire is violated next week, or in the case of Yemen, just violated it within just a few weeks of its agreement. So there has to be some tangible guarantees by both parties, and particularly Israel, to feel secure that Hamas cannot regroup and not continue to launch meaningful strikes against Israel.
And I just want to go to another topic, if I can, Adolfo, and ask you a little bit about there's growing outrage among some MAGA supporters, and this all seems to be over Trump's decision not to release the Epstein files, with Elon Musk alleging Steve Bannon is on this list. Does the public deserve to know the truth when it comes to these Epstein files?
I think the public does. And I do think that is a challenge for the administration. Keep in mind that the two individuals that have reviewed this at the highest level are the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, and Deputy Director Benjamin. And both of them in the past had alleged that Epstein had actually not committed suicide, and now they're saying he did when they're in positions of power. So that's why the suspicions are quite raised with the MAGA movement. I venture to say that a lot more information is going to have to come out on that issue before MAGA and other Republicans are satisfied, because you can't have it both ways. You can't, when you're out of power, allege there was a conspiracy. When you come into power, say there wasn't a conspiracy, but we're not really to date providing much information. So I think a lot more of that is going to have to come forward, and it will not, an issue that will not go away with MAGA supporters.
So do you think they will be released?
I do. I think it's an absolute necessity. The kind of practices that existed in the past with respect to previous assassinations 50 or 60 years ago in the United States is just not possible today. I think they will be released and need to be released.
Adolfo. Oh, apologies for interrupting you. Adolfo Franco, thank you so much for joining us.
Delighted to be with you. Thank you so much.
Turning to sport now, and Christian Horner has been sacked from his role as Red Bull team principal. The 51-year-old has been in charge of the Formula One team for 20 years, leading them to 8 drivers' championship titles. The news comes over a year after Horner was accused of sexual harassment and coercive controlling behaviour by a female employee. He was cleared of those accusations twice. For more on this, I'm joined by sports journalist and editor Mark Lomas. Mark, a pleasure to have you on the show. I think one of the key questions is why, Mark, why now? You know, we just mentioned there a year after these allegations were made against Christian Horner, he's now got the sack. Many people are saying, why didn't this happen sooner?
Absolutely. I think it's very much the question on everyone's lips. It's highly unusual for a Formula One team to sack and get rid of a team principal partway through the season. You know, we've just had a Grand Prix. We're halfway through the Formula One season. So it's very unusual. And the details of exactly why Red Bull have decided to let Christian Horner go at this time, we don't have them all, but I'm sure they will come to light. But it is interesting timing, mainly because, as you said, it seemed like he was at the end of his tenure last year when all of these allegations came forward. He was cleared. It seemed like the slate had been wiped clean in a way, but now it's not the case. So yeah, it's very disruptive, particularly for a team as big as Red Bull, to happen partway through the season.
Yeah, and as you say, it's just like halfway through the season. And let's be honest, Red Bull has had huge success dominating Formula One, but have only had 2 wins in 12 races, I think it is by my calculation. What's going so drastically wrong here?
Well, there's been big upheaval at Red Bull. So Christian Horner leaving now is only kind of the latest development at Red Bull. So we had the sporting director, Jonathan Wheatley, left and went to Sauber. We had Adrian Newey, who's the technical director. He left and went to Aston Martin. He's widely seen as the mastermind, if you like, behind Red Bull's success in recent years. So there has been a lot of upheaval behind the scenes. That would explain why things have been going not quite as well this season to meeting those high standards that Red Bull have set in recent years, with Max Verstappen winning multiple world titles. So there is, if you're looking at it from a performance perspective, this is the worst we've seen Red Bull perform in recent years. So perhaps that is the reason why they've now chosen this moment to let Christian Horner go.
And obviously, Christian Horner has been with the team since the inception of Red Bull. And he just mentioned there a whole lot of the other top team have left and resigned and moved on. What is going to happen after Horner? Could we actually see the team potentially collapse?
I'm not sure if it'll quite collapse, but we've had Lauren McKees has been parachuted in to take up the role of team principal. So Red Bull have 2 teams in Formula One. They also have the Racing Bulls team, which is the sister team to the main Red Bull racing team. And Adrian has been parachuted in to take up that team principal role to replace Christian Horner. That will at least be until the end of the season. Whether he does enough in that time to show that he can kind of steady the ship and move the team forward, I think that will be interesting. But I think the bigger question on everyone's lips now will be around Max Verstappen and Max Verstappen's future. There'd already been speculation about that, and I think that will only continue now. But yeah, it's going to be strange, to be honest, watching a Red Bull racing without Christian Horner pulling the strings behind the scenes, because it's 287 podium finishes, 184 race wins that he's overseen. So yeah, it'll be unusual seeing him gone.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, I think a lot of people are speculating, will Max Verstappen go to Mercedes? But I'm going to ask you about another story right now, and that's the Esports World Cup. It's returned to Riyadh, showcasing talent from around the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about esports and what it all involves?
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is the biggest ever edition of the Esports World Cup. It's the second time in a row that it was rebranded a couple of years ago, and it's the second time in a row that it's been taking place in Riyadh. It's the biggest ever prize pot available for an esports event this time round. So it's over $70 million. We have 25 different titles. We have more than 2,000 gamers taking part over the next month or so. And it's really kind of underlining what has been a massive investment from Saudi Arabia in esports. I think one report earlier this year suggested it was around $38 billion, creating and making the kingdom an epicenter for global esports. So this is the latest step. We'll also see the Olympic esports games taking place in the kingdom in 2027. So I feel like, this is the time for esports in Saudi Arabia, very much.
Did you say $70 million as a prize money, Mark?
That's split between different people, but yes, that's the overall prize.
I think we're in the wrong career, definitely. Mark Lomas, thank you so much for joining me. Absolute pleasure to have you on. A reminder of our top stories. Russia unleashes its biggest drone attack on Ukraine as Zelensky travels to meet the Pope and calls for tougher sanctions. No breakthrough in Gaza ceasefire talks as Netanyahu wraps up a third White House meeting with Trump and US envoy delays his trip to Doha. And Christian Horner sacked as Red Bull team principal after 20 years amid team decline and internal disputes. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.